So welcome. I hope you're having a great Friday. I hope you're enjoying the sessions. I was able to pop into a few myself today, but also in working. So I wasn't able to spend a lot of time, but it looks like there's some really great conversations. And I'm excited to be participating in them with you as well. My name is Amy Petrowitz. I'm the Managing Project Coordinator for Prior Learning Assessment in the Learning Outcomes and Quality Improvement Group at Excelsior University. So that's a lot to tell you that I work with a lot of students who are adult learners, and they're hoping to bring their work and life experiences to us and attain their college degrees, but potentially earn college credit for their work and life experience. And so I facilitate that for both the university and the students. We have a number of partnerships that help us accomplish those tasks and goals. And so I today was asked to speak with you about a few areas of interest for me, in addition to prior learning, artificial intelligence, and prior learning, and how those two intersect. So, what do we know about AI and how it measures what learners know? And I said, if you know, you know. And obviously, this is an evolving field and an exciting time to be in higher education. It's an exciting time to be in prior learning. It's an exciting time to work with artificial intelligence. So, if we're ready to begin, I'll kick it off. So the overview that was advertised is pretty lengthy, and I tend to be long-winded, and I apologize. But the backstory is I've been an English teacher for a number of years, and so yes, I everything will be in sentence case. I do apologize. The original sort of idea that I had for the session was based on the 1966 Phi Delta Kappan article that you may or may not be familiar with. Ellis Betten Page, obviously the educational psychologist, came out with this sort of radical idea in 1966 that computers could give instructors sort of the stylistic and subject matter analysis abilities to grade student essays. And I think he, like many of us who have been in the profession and having to grade student essays, was looking for a way to sort of expedite that process, having been a former English teacher himself. So he worked on that for a significant amount of time, 2 decades after that first article was published. We saw the arrival of what's referred to as automated essay scoring, or AES, and that really altered the landscape for a higher education assessment. Going forward, we were able to sort of develop AES in a parallel path along with sort of the development of artificial intelligence on the computer science side. And now we sort of have an opportunity where they're really intersecting even more so since the sort of 2020s boom of artificial intelligence applications, and so much so that I feel like we really do have sort of embedded AI in a lot of our applications that we may or may not even recognize when we're doing a search of any type, when we're doing spell check, when we're watching Netflix and our queue updates with sort of what we should our recommended shows to watch next. And so AI really has become an integral part of our lives as just human beings as well as educators. So my questions as I think about sort of how this helps us move PLA forward, prior learning assessment forward, is can computers really help us with sort of the determination of academic credit awards with regard to experiential learning? Particularly, is it valid? So validity is a concern. And is it equitable? Can we do this in an unbiased way that will really help students? One of the major aims of prior learning assessment is that we are trying to close some achievement gaps. And we do want to make higher education accessible to more people, especially older adults who perhaps went straight into the workforce or who didn't have the opportunity to enroll in higher education straight out of high school. And so sort of a way to bridge those gaps for those learners is to use PLA as an entry point. We also see PLA used for students who are perhaps in the middle of a program or nearing the end of their program of studies. It also helps them complete their degree requirements so that a student doesn't need to stop out or drop out. And we're aware of some of that statistical data on how many students are faced with those sorts of issues during their program of studies. And so could AI help us as institutions and as practitioners really increase the availability of prior learning assessments for students, or perhaps perform them in a more significant way so that we could award credit to students who are deserving? And so if you're curious about that too, I hope you'll join me in the conversation. Our outcomes today, I just wanted to touch briefly on, I hope we can talk about the historical context of AES and how it's evolved. Also talk a little bit about the impact of machine learning on particularly prior learning assessment. We'll touch on validity, fairness, and reliability with regard to AI and being able to determine experiential learning credit, and then also evaluate AI as a measure of writing quality, which really is a focus for me, both as an instructor of English composition at the undergraduate level and also in my role as a prior learning assessment proponent. So hopefully that will be helpful. The infamous essay, of course, I wanted to provide a screenshot of it for you. Again, when this came out in 1966, this was sort of radical thinking, the vision of AI or a computer providing like the subject matter analysis that a seasoned educator would be able to provide was somewhat radical. The argument for being able to even score an essay, a piece of writing using a computer was sort of shocking to folks and something that wasn't necessarily top of mind at that time. And then obviously again, going back to sort of what the impetus was for the program or the project, being able to give feedback by the first bell of the next day, as quoted in the article, was something that was very much sort of the phrase of the time when we were discussing this. As colleagues, we were talking about, we are very much aware of the need to provide timely feedback. And so this was sort of one of those first programs that looked at how quickly we can analyze an essay and get back to a student and give them meaningful feedback to help them in their learning journey. So AES stands for Automated Essay Scoring, the evolution of which really Ellis Page continued or advanced his studies in the field for several decades. He also produced the Project Essay Grade or PEG system, which was popular in the 1980s. That evolved, of course, through a number of iterations. We also saw the rise of Intelligent Essay Assessor, or IEA, which was used for undergraduate courses. We also see other offerings coming through Pearson and the Educational Testing Service, or ETS, well into the 1990s. Continuing along the timeline, ETS offers E-Rater and still does, and Criterion Online Writing Evaluation Service that became commercially widespread in the 2000s. And we still see AES leveraging artificial intelligence, even more so through either natural language processing, machine learning, and again, that boom era of AI that really came out in the 2020s. I think there's an interesting connection between the development of sort of AES that ran parallel with the development of AI through those same decades or through those same eras and timelines, and how they're so embedded now is also interesting. So I'll just take a minute to pause and talk about a quick case study for those of you that are interested. PEG became part of standardized testing. ETS Criterion used the E-Rater engine for GRE and TOEFL, still does. So you may be familiar with it in that context. Also, the University of California, Berkeley was experimenting with AES and their freshmen, especially their large-scale freshman composition courses. Some of the benefits, obviously, of using AES for essay scoring is the objectivity, the scalability, and the ability to provide quick feedback. Again, that by the time the bell rings the next morning, the students had their essays returned and were given appropriate or adequate feedback. Unfortunately, we're looking at limitations, and the debate over the nuances of writing that computers may not fully understand still exists. When we talk about things like creativity or critical thinking and tone, our computer counterparts who are scoring essays may or may not be quite there yet in terms of understanding the sort of those features of student writing. So as we sort of want to weave threads together between AI and prior learning assessments, prior learning assessment or the credit for prior learning, either of those acronyms are used interchangeably at our institution. But PLA or CPL awards are provided to students. It's academic credit. It goes on their transcript. It fulfills their program or degree requirements. And that is awarded for non-traditional learning experiences. And so things that happen outside of the traditional classroom. Typical types of PLA or CPL credit would be awarded for military service and training. So a student has a JST that they come in from their military service, or their CCAF transcript if they're in the Air Force. And they have a number of trainings that they've completed through their military service. And we would quantify that experience or that training as academic credit for them. We also look at other types of credentials in the health sciences, computer sciences field. We look at EMT licenses, CNAs, um, folks who have work experience, but also additional training in their area are also sometimes credentialed in ways that we can quantify as academic credit or credit worthy. And so we endeavor to do that through a number of ways, but the most popular, probably most common way is the use of student portfolios. And so having a student submit a portfolio similar to, an artist's portfolio, or if they're being considered for, sort of a certification, they would have to demonstrate a number of different capabilities in order to be evaluated. And so really the portfolio for prior learning assessment looks to sort of establish, number one, a timeline. We're looking at the length in which a student has spent in their field or in that particular training, learning those skills and earning those credentials. The second thing that it looks at is sort of the academic rigor associated with that area of study. And so we want to understand, how deep is the knowledge that the student has. That also touches a little bit upon competency-based education in terms of what competencies does the student bring based on their knowledge, skills, and experience that we could evaluate for academic credit. So all of these things sort of combine. The important component and why I raised this today and what I was hoping to accomplish was to show that a significant part of the academic portfolio or PLA portfolio that we ask students to submit is a narrative essay. So they are expected to produce a piece of writing in essay form, and that writing really describes their experiences in their field throughout their life. That we then use that essay to score via rubrics and decide if the academic credit value is at a certain level, either the amount of credit or the level of credit. And so, oh, you don't see the presentation, Susie? I'm so sorry. Thanks for telling me. Hold on, let's try this again. What slide do you see?
Overview.
Okay, so we're back in sync. Okay. Okay, so sorry. This is so welcome. We'll start over. Do-overs are always welcome. It's all about learning and growth. So here we go. So again, we're past the overview. We talked about the outcomes. Here's the image of the actual article by Ellis that we referenced earlier on when that first came out in 1966. Again, radical thinking from educational psychologist, former English teacher. We looked briefly or talked briefly about the timeline through the evolution. And we also talked about the sort of how when we're employing AES, there's some benefits and also some limitations. Prior learning is where we hopefully can catch up to, and this hopefully will make sense now, even though we've kind of backtracked a little bit. But we're using portfolios to assess adult learners, and obviously CALE, if you're in the prior learning space, is sort of our leading think tank and advocacy group who talks about how we should and shouldn't be evaluating experiential learning for adult learners. They've been doing this for a number of years, and they are also sort of highlighting that a robust AI system might help determine appropriate credit for experiential learning. So there are a number of sort of threads that are subtly being, or maybe not so subtly, being woven together at this particular time, which is why I said it's really exciting to think about sort of the intersection of all of these ideas coming and rapidly sort of coming to the forefront and developing together, as well as homogenizing. So we were hopefully going to talk about some case studies again. Southern New Hampshire University has pioneered the use of AI for assessing Student portfolio submissions. They have a competency-based education program. They use the data analytics to evaluate student portfolios for prior learning credit. They also use AI to help them evaluate the scope and depth of the experiences. And their program really shows that we can, in fact, where there is potential to use AI in streamlining the PLA evaluation process. Typically, PLA process is done by hand. And so a student will submit their portfolio. It goes either forward for faculty evaluation. Subject matter experts are often utilized by institutions as well to look at some of the specialized areas. And so that tends to be a long process, obviously not operationally efficient, not a cost savings for institutions. When we consider the value proposition of PLA and CPL at the university level, there are also some, concerns around if we're awarding students credit, are we somehow devaluing the educational experience or the classroom experience? And so that's another area that, not to go down that path today together, but that's another area where institutions often struggle to understand how to successfully implement CPL and PLA programs. Those offices, depending on sort of the appetite of the institution for CPL and PLA credit, will have, varying amounts of staff available as resources. And so when we want to expand or talk about students, submitting portfolios that are scored by hand by evaluators or by faculty, that can be somewhat of a laborious task and involve a significant amount of cost, which many institutions may or may not feel is appropriate. And so if there's a way to streamline by using AI as sort of a helpful tool for assessment of experiential learning, I think that's where there's an opportunity for us to sort of expand either the CPL, PLA offerings, expand access to students, but also to sort of bring in other types of learning that we know students have or adults have that could also be certified as academic credit. The challenges of using AI in PLA and CPL is that it may or may not be capable of evaluating complex non-traditional learning. A student portfolio, when submitted for evaluation, will have a number of artifacts. Those may be things like certificates from training programs. They could be, as I mentioned earlier, Joint Services transcript or CCAF transcript from the Air Force. It could also be letters. It could be letters of recommendation from employers. It could be a work history. It could be something like a resume. It could be the essay that I mentioned that we ask for in our portfolio assessments. And so all of that may or may not necessarily be machine readable. We also have ethical concerns in terms of the fairness and reliability. We know sometimes when we're using computers, they are not always as standardized as they may be. They may or may not be adaptable to different student accessibility concerns. They may also not be able to be adapted for certain language concerns. And so can AI assess contextual factors in experiential learning is another thing that we want to be cautious of when we're considering using AI in PLA and CPL. So if we go back to the AES questions, AI, yes, can assess technical aspects like grammar and coherence. We know that it can read an essay or read a student response and determine if, in fact, the writing is of quality based on sort of the models and the rubrics that it's been fed or how it's been trained. But can it measure creativity, critical thinking, and tone? So those are the areas particularly where AI is maybe not the best tool to read student essays as part of PLA or CPL portfolios. Therefore, it may or may not be a trustworthy method or the primary tool for assessing or grading those essays. The Turing test for writing, which I know many of us may be already familiar with, but in 2018 at Stanford University, they tested out the AI systems that were grading SAT exams. And so the research found that while AI did outperform some human graders in scoring with regard to the technical or grammatical writing aspects, the humans still performed better when grading more subjective and creative essays. And so this reflects that same tension between machine evaluation and human judgment. So we know a machine can, spell check, um, but does the machine understand some of the nuances? Probably not. There's an anecdote that I usually share with my English composition classes. I had a student who wrote an essay about the bluefin tuna spices. And I was excited because I was thinking, wow, I love cooking. I can't wait to read more about bluefin tuna spices. That sounds delicious. But the student, in fact, had made an error, and it was a spelling error or a word choice error, and that they meant to talk about the bluefin tuna species. And even though they had used the AI's, embedded tool in their word processing program to spell check, when they did that global find and replace, they wound up replacing all of the species instances with the word spices instead. And so even though the machine, in that case was correct and the word spices was spelled correct, species also could have been spelled correctly. The nuance of the usage of the word was not captured, obviously. And so that's one example where it kind of shows in a very simplistic way that there's still some flaws that need to be addressed before we can wholly rely on A to assess student essays and writing. Big ethical questions. Should AI replace humans in assessment of prior learning? Potentially. There are some programs out right now. There are some companies right now who are looking to sort of build the AI bots and programs and software that will provide this particular type of assessment of prior learning or credit for prior learning. They're also considering the fact that if a student is able to have their prior learning certified for academic credit, they could then also have mobility. And so they would have those packable or stackable credentials that if they wanted to shop around or look at different institutions and take their credits with them, that they could do so using that particular type of software or that application. The pros, obviously, again, are that when we're using AI for scoring student essays, particularly in the CPL and PLA portfolios, that there's efficiencies, the consistency and scalability that's provided. Again, the cons being lack of creativity, assessment, and human context. So the conclusion that AI should be a tool and not a replacement for humans, I think is still maintained as sort of the top of mind for most folks. The best practices indicate that more oversight is needed. We need to monitor as well for data because essays are evidence that falls outside of what can be scored. For instance, if we're talking about a student's certification or let's say an EMT credential, EMT cards are usually meant to be carried in a wallet. And so they tend to be wallet sized. And so we scan them. And even though we scan them as part of the student portfolio, an AI tool may or may not be trained to read something that falls outside of sort of whatever model they're following. So we really do need to be strategic about watching what comes in that we put forward for any of these tools to score for AES scoring or other AI tools. Also, we need to assess the risk of bias and models that we're developing. And so I think as we move forward, I might be out of sync with the slides, but I'll double check in a minute. But we know that the AI, the language learning models in the AI tools are teachable. They're learning as they go. They're also given parameters, things to look for, things to learn, so that they can teach themselves. But what sometimes occurs is that the more they continue down a path, the more opportunity there is for them to develop the same bias because the material that they're pulling in is also biased. And so it sort of compounds that issue or the risk that the bias in the models will be transferred into the scoring as well. So at this stage, even though we've seen a lot of advancements in 2025 between AI and scoring, I think of applications like Grammarly that a lot of students are using, Microsoft Copilot. We have a number of other AI tools that students are using for note taking. Students are using it for composition. Students are using it for editing. All of those AI tools are helping students, but I think also that perhaps if we were to start using them for assessment particularly, we would want to really be aware of the directed feedback section. And so at this stage, human scoring really is a more careful analysis. Again, the computer may not be able to detect certain nuances, but we can certainly give better directed feedback to students. And really, when we talk about that assessment and feedback loop, it really comes down to making a connection with the students. If I'm evaluating a student portfolio for PLA or CPL, I don't want to rely wholly on AI tools or software to do it. Um, and the reason for that is I'm probably going to have a conversation with the student. We're probably going to interact. We're going to build that connection. And then hopefully through that connection and through those conversations, I can get a better understanding of what the students' capabilities are, what their goals are. And that will help me as the evaluator align their skills and credentials with their goals in the particular pathways that they're on. So there does need to be a match when we award. The skills that they're coming in may be extremely helpful, but if they're not applicable to their degree program, then do we award academic credit or not? And so that's another consideration too. So I did miss some slides, and I'm so sorry. I don't understand what's going on with the PowerPoint today. I do apologize. But in closing, AI and AES are here to stay in PLA. That's something that will not go away. We're going to continue to see third-party service providers developing faster than many institutions are able to, solutions for us. CALE themselves is working on portfolio-based assessment, as well as other AI-driven tools that will allow students to upload their sort of credentials and then immediately have those transferred into academic credit at a number of institutions. There's still ethical and practical challenges in terms of privacy, obviously a concern, as most AI tools are cloud-based. Would the students' PLA information be stored or shared securely? And the ethical components regarding if a student's work and life experiences are to be evaluated. And again, this gets into some areas that we maybe haven't considered yet either. But if we're relying solely on the AI tool and or the machine learning to do the evaluation, it may or may not necessarily be unbiased as we would hope it would be. So again, AI should complement and not replace the human forms of assessment. So I did have reflection questions, but I just wanted to take a quick scan back. And again, I apologize. We missed quite a few slides, and I'm not sure what happened in the changing of them. But one of the things that I did want to touch on, which appears to not be here, so I do apologize, is sort of the tasks or the validity of scoring and assessment. And so if we just want to hopefully go back to that, I'm sorry, this is not as it was designed. But assessment in the evaluation of PLA and CPL learning is when we're looking at the abilities and skills and knowledge of the student that they take outside the institution and bring into us. And so we really want to be able to document that and certify that for credit. When I mentioned the portfolios previously, the artifacts that we take in are part of the student's portfolio. They also are part of the evaluation, but they're also part of the validation of the credit, or if the registrar's office were to request that, we would have that available to them. And so having those documents in hand or having our own rubrics completed in hand is something that we value highly as an institution, so that we have the validity that's sort of documented all throughout the process of the portfolio versus having a student submit an essay, having it read by a machine, and then just sort of getting an output or a result. So really there's more, there's a richness or there's a depth to the student portfolio when we're scoring by hand that isn't captured with the AI tools. I'm so sorry, but the slides that are missing, I'll have to, I'll gladly, if anyone wants to reach out provide the correct slides. Hopefully they'll be viewable. I'm not quite sure what's going on with my system, and I do apologize again. But so some of the reflection questions were, if you were going to incorporate AI into your own assessment practices, would you consider it for CPL particularly, or would you stay sort of in the academic lane and use it for your tests, quizzes, essays now? And then what other ethical considerations of AI and assessment are going on at your institution? I'll share briefly that we have had a recent sort of conversation around the use of AI tools for recording in classrooms. And the ethical concerns on that are not just the FERPA sort of situations, but recording dialogue between students that happens extemporaneously during class or impromptu conversations, and storing that in an AI tool, and having that information either be compromised because of security risks, or we have a two-party consent state. Not all states have that level of consent, but it extends to the students in the course as well, having to be sort of on camera and or recorded. And so then we sort of get into the legality of it in terms of getting permissions and those types of things. As far as CPL and PLA portfolios go, typically the students, when they're applying, there are terms and conditions and a set of waivers that they complete, that they are willing to provide the information to us. We do store it in a secure facility. But the introduction of AI, as well as other sort of third-party vendors, does raise or increase the risk, both from FERPA perspective, but also from compliance. And so we want to make sure that as we consider all of the new and upcoming CPL and PLA evaluative tools that incorporate AI, that we're being cognizant of some of those underlying like legal issues and or compliance issues that we may or may not even be anticipating as of yet. I'm gonna so the QR code obviously didn't work either, so something's off today, but there's a list of resources. This is out of order, I apologize. There's a list of resources that I'm happy to share as well. The technical terms, I think this goes with some of the slides that might have been missing or out of order at this point, but we did mention AES for automated essay scoring, neural networks, the machine learning model inspired by the human brain, which is used for recognizing patterns and predictions based on data. We also had item response theory. Again, when we're talking about students' abilities to perform, that's that area of AI. And then we didn't touch upon natural language processing, but natural language processing, or NLP, is where we focus on computers and human language. That's the section of AI that really works with text and speech. And so most of our AES sort of programs and or endeavors rely on natural language processing sort of as the rationale for understanding the text and speech of the student's essay. I'm going to end there because it's woefully I apologize, not what I had planned today. I'd be happy to take any questions. Go back and see if I can find it. Susan, I'm not going to give you these slides, but I will happily send out the slides. If you want to send me an email, I'll put my email right now in the chat. You can find me here. You can also find me on LinkedIn if that's easier. Again, I'll make sure that I'm sending out the correct slides, and it will have the Q code in it with those resources. The application of artificial intelligence to assessment is really, I think, going to be a focus for at least the foreseeable future as we try and determine, how do we use. Oh, thanks, Susie. I appreciate that. as we sort of consider, how can we assess students using these tools, but also provide them with meaningful feedback, and also, eliminating the bias. So there's sorts of so many parts and components of AI right now. AI governance, as I mentioned, the legality of things that are sort of all rapidly evolving all at the same time. And so I think of sort of the analogy that sometimes we use in our office, which I'll share, is that, how do we untangle the tangle? And a lot of what hopefully we're gonna be able to do shortly, right? Because again, the evolution is so rapid. Hopefully, we'll be able to start seeing some of these issues improved upon as the machines get smarter, but also I think as we get smarter as humans. And so for our understanding of how we can utilize these tools, I think there's tremendous potential for growth and learning, as well as the machines themselves. And so, again, as we look to sort of help adults enter higher education, as we look to help our students who are currently engaged in their programs of studies complete their education, PLA and CPL is certainly one way that we can help that, but also if we can apply AI sort of and help that student reach their CPL or PLA goals as well as their educational goals, it'll be interesting to see. So we're all in for some really exciting times. I do apologize for the presentation, and I will definitely share the slides. Susie, I'll get them to you as soon as possible and load them into the events hub. So hopefully the rest of your sessions will be better than this one. But again, if you have questions or you want to reach out or you're interested in these topics, I have lots of resources to share. I'd be happy to share them with everyone. We always, as we all know, as educators, we make it work. And so hopefully there'll be lots of learning and growth from this particular session today. So that being said, I just wanted to give everyone an opportunity to ask questions if they had any questions. All right. Thanks. I appreciate all that. Yeah, I appreciate the empathy. Really, I do. I tend to be a humanist, so today's not my day apparently. So for what it's worth, hopefully your day goes better and you have a great weekend. Thanks so much. Good luck in
Thanks,
all your
Amy.
CPL and PLA endeavors, as well as your pursuit of AI education today. So take care, everyone.